Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking about a media startup that created a newswire for data journalism. Over the past decade, several major media companies have invested in building out their data journalism operations. ABC News has 538, the New York Times has The Upshot, and Vox Media runs Vox.com. These outlets have leveraged publicly available data to explain complicated stories, and the infographics they create are easily shareable on social media. But most media outlets don't have the resources to hire an expensive data team, especially if they operate at the local level. That's where Stacker comes in. Rather than producing journalism for its owned and operated site, it distributes its content as a newswire that can be syndicated by any news company. What's more, it doesn't even charge for this service. That means virtually every news outlet has access to its top quality reporting. How can Stacker afford to give away its content for free? To answer that question, I brought on co-founder Noah Greenberg. He talked to me through Stacker's origin story, how it found its initial publishing partners, and how it developed its monetization strategy. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about this week's sponsor, Memberful. Memberful is the easiest way to sell memberships to your audience, used by the biggest creators on the web. Maybe your business's financial situation has changed in the past year, and you need a proven solution that's quick to launch so you can stabilize your business and grow. Memberful allows you to build sustainable, recurring revenue through membership. It handles the hard stuff so you can focus on what you do best while earning revenue quickly. Memberful has everything you need to run a membership program, including an optimized checkout, Apple Pay, easy member management, dashboard analytics, free trials, gift subscriptions, and more. Memberful seamlessly integrates with the tools you already use, with lots of fully managed integrations with the most popular services. With Memberful, you always have full control and ownership of your audience, your brand, and your membership. Payments go directly to your own Stripe account. Get started for free, no credit card required. Visit memberful.com/Simon Owens. That's memberful.com/Simon Owens. I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, now on to my interview with Noah. Hey Noah, thanks for joining us.
Hey, no problem. Excited to be here.
So you run a cool newswire company called Stacker, and I want to start by talking a little bit about its origin story and what your background was prior to working on it. So you actually worked for a company prior to launching Stacker that specialized in some kind of data visualization or something like that, right?
Yeah, I spent about 6 years at a startup called Graphic, where I was heading up a business development team, pitching in a library of visualizations into dozens of newsrooms. I think joining a startup is probably one of the best jobs you can take right out of college, just because you get so much experience way too quickly. And I think it gave me more responsibility than I deserved at a really young age, but gave me exposure to a lot of things that would have probably taken many more years to get elsewhere.
And Graphic was like a VC funded
Yeah,
startup.
typical venture back startup,
And
exactly.
and what was its business model? Like what did it actually do?
So we took in massive data sets and built a semantic platform so that a number of different user types could kind of gather meaning from the data. My team was taking a massive library of visualizations and making those available to publishers. The company ended up getting bought in 2017 by Amazon, who repurposed the technology for Alexa and basically shut down our publishing division, told us we had a few weeks to find other jobs at Amazon or kick rocks. And myself and my three co-founders at Stacker decided to break off and start Stacker.
And so Graphic, like it would actually create these visualizations and then license them to publishers?
Yeah, so we had a technology. You can almost think of like a massive Getty Images library, but for interactive charts, maps, and graphs. So we had billions of live updating charts ranging from stock prices to sports statistics to unemployment rates. And then we would create licensing agreements with newsrooms to bring more data into their stories, for newsrooms that maybe had one visual data journalist but wanted to bring charts into way more stories than that one data journalist could support.
So this was your first job out of college. So it was like a crash course in like data journalism and data storytelling and all that kind of stuff.
It was a crash course in journalism. I had no formal background in media before joining Graphic, so I got a ton of exposure to the media business and also just a ton of exposure to what it was like trying to grow and operate a business, what it was like trying to reach out and strike partnerships as a new company that no one has heard of. And so a lot of the time when younger people ask me what are some of the best jobs I could take out of college, I think every 22-year-old should either go into management consulting or get a job at a really small startup. Both of them are kind of crash courses in getting a lot of skills in two very different ways. But I think startups can be an awesome way to take on a ton of responsibility at a young age, and just kind of trial by fire.
And you were on the business side, so you were like establishing the partnerships with the publishers.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that gave you kind of, and we'll get into this, the kind of knowledge base and the connections, I'm guessing, so that you could, get off the ground very quickly when you guys launched Stacker. So 2017, Amazon buys Stacker, decides media business is a dying industry. They want to focus on, growing their Alexa app and incorporating all that into it. You didn't want to work at Amazon. What was kind of the inkling of the idea of, starting Stacker?
So in 2017, the inkling was I want to start something and see if we can make it on our own. But I think really the genesis of Stacker specifically was kind of saw two things happening in the market. One of which, from a content side, was from working with so many newsrooms, we saw there was this growing appetite for data journalism. You had things like the Upshot at the New York Times, 538, Vox's explainers were really blowing up back then. But I think one of the things we noticed was all of that content was being presented in a very classic long form narrative format. And for better or worse, readers were going to BuzzFeed, they were going to Upworthy, they were showing a propensity for more easy to digest content. And nothing really existed kind of in the middle of that Venn diagram. And so we set out on one hand to create content from public data that could be presented in a much more easy to digest format.
Yeah, and so you left with your co-founders or other people who also worked at Graphic. And what was
Exactly.
their skill sets?
Uh, all of us had a partnerships background. We started Stacker really with just a very strong partnership skill set, and that
Mhm.
has manifested itself in how we have built the company, really.
Yeah, because crucially, you didn't. A lot of media startups that launch today, they have their own owned and operated platform, their own owned and operated website, and then maybe some social accounts that they're blasting it out to. Whereas came out of the gate wanting to be some kind of newswire service where you could basically you would create the content, but others would publish it. Why did you go that route?
So for one, when 2017, it was a very crowded media landscape, and trying to launch a consumer facing brand without massive venture capital seemed like a really daunting and potentially impossible task. I also am a strong believer that you should do things that you think you can be the best at. And without either having massive venture capital backing for marketing or having some secret sauce when it came to social media marketing, what I knew was partnerships, and had seen the opportunity to strike syndication partnerships with publishers who were looking for additional content to augment what they were producing in house. And so we said, you know what? We're not really going to think about how we get people to stacker.com. Instead, we're going to leverage audiences across hundreds of other publishers that already have that audience. And to your point, really reposition ourselves as a newswire, and look for audiences elsewhere versus on our own site.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you didn't have venture capital money. Those publishers could presumably start paying you right away, so you could start generating revenue very early on in your founding
Yeah,
too.
so what we knew early on is that there are a small handful of aggregators that pay for content. So you have MSN.com, there are a lot of upstarts like Smart News, Newsbreak, Opera, Apple News, the list goes on. There are, a handful of companies that actually will pay you for quality, engaging content. And uh, we had bootstrapped the organization. We were looking for how do we get to profitability ASAP. And instead of publishing content and waiting for people to find us, we said, let's go straight to the source. Let's partner with these aggregators, which enabled us to not only reach an audience very quickly, but get to profitability very quickly.
So walk me through those first few months, because you said that you all had partnership backgrounds. So I guess you didn't really have content creation like skill set yourselves. How did you start creating content, and how did you start making those initial partnerships with those aggregators?
Yeah, so we started the company. The four founders put in a collective 60 grand, and we said, journalism is a rare industry where some of the best talent wants to work freelance. And so we went out, we decided we could either hire freelance writers or freelance editors to start with. We knew I'm a better editor than I am a writer. And so in those early days, we went out, hired freelance writers, worked with them on story ideas that we had kind of fostered in house, and started paying people to write content. We were editing that content in house and then syndicating it to some of those aggregators that we worked with. And over the first 6 months, kind of rinsed and repeated that cycle till we were able to slowly bring in at first a class of interns. So that first summer we had 5 full-time college interns and 4 full-time employees. And then slowly, producing more content, syndicating that out, and with those profits month over month, reinvesting in the team. And over that first year and a half, we're able to build out about a 15-person newsroom full time, as we really focused on the content operation.
And you mentioned like 538 and the Upshot and some other data journalism outfits. Can you give me a concrete example of like a piece of like data journalism that you would create that was differentiated from like what you would see on like a 538, to get a sense of like what kind of content you were creating on a regular basis?
For sure. So I think what we realized is that there's a certain audience that wants to go to New York Times and read a piece on the state of unemployment in America. But that if we took the Bureau of Labor Statistics unemployment database and created a story ranking all 50 states by how their unemployment changed since Biden took office, and then also pull out insights on what are the industries in any state that have lost or gained the most jobs, that a story titled ranking all 50 states by how their unemployment changed since Biden took office brings in different readers that are going to read that New York Times piece, and can be really engaging when you're pulling out some of those insights that are in that data set.
And how did you get your content in front of the people who were putting them on the aggregators? Like, I'm guessing you talked to someone like the biz dev people at MSN, but how did the editors working at MSN, how were they made aware of a new piece of content that they could even know to include in their aggregation? Like, what was kind of the pipeline to the people who made the decisions about whether to feature your content?
Yeah, each of the aggregators work in a slightly different way, but in short, they create partnerships where you plug in your RSS feeds. And so every time we publish a piece of content, it's getting in front of, depending on the partner, either in front of an algorithm that is placing that content in front of readers, or in front of an editor that is selecting that piece of content and putting it in front of readers.
So I've never worked at any of these aggregators, so they're looking at some kind of fire hose of
Of
content of
content.
all the different news wires that's coming across, and so you don't have someone emailing an individual editor saying, "I think this would be good for you," or something like that.
Uh, in rare occasions, yes, when there's an event coming up and we have a piece that we're really excited about, but not for every piece that we're producing. No, it's more of a fire hose that
Mhm.
they're looking at.
And then when those aggregators, when they'd run one of your pieces, would they pay you a set amount, or was it like a revenue share? What was the kind of way it
Yeah, so
worked?
most of them operate on a revenue share. So, differing terms depending on size of publisher, size of partner, etc. But the short of it is there's a lot of partnerships out there where these aggregators will pay a rev share for advertising revenue they generate on your content. And if you're running a really lean newsroom, it can be an awesome way to generate pretty significant revenue upfront.
hmm And so, yeah, so you wanted things to not them to not only pick it up, but it also to go viral because that would, benefit you potentially
The more
exponentially
readers,
if you were,
the more revenue, exactly.
yeah. But you didn't really have access to those kinds of analytics, I'm guessing.
No.
Or what I don't know what, yeah. So in a lot of your content, you don't really you don't really know how it performs because it's not on your own and operated sites.
Yeah, a lot of them do provide, very basic dashboards to show you the views that your stories are getting. But we're really thinking about, what are the stories we want to tell, looking at maybe end of the month data at what stories did get the most views, and then making iterations on our strategy over time.
And so, and also, like there are a lot of like established news services, Getty for images and video, and like AP for news and stuff like that. But a lot of them like have steep like monthly fees and stuff like that. Kind of your innovation was you were kind of like, here, this content's for free. And it's a revenue share, and it still is 100% free today. And that's how you were able to muscle your way into like these much better compared to these much better, well-funded newswire services, right?
So working with those aggregators was really, that was our early, how do we bootstrap this? How do we grow the operation? What we soon realized is that there were thousands of additional really quality publishers out there who don't have revenue share models in place. They probably don't even have the technology to track how much revenue might have been generated on a piece we syndicate, but they do have a really large appetite for quality content from third parties. And in 2020, we kind of expanded our partnership model to start delivering and providing license to Stacker's content feeds for free to local publications. And again, really double down on we are a newswire. We're not looking for audience on stacker.com, but we're going to strike partnerships to syndicate our content to, at the time, hundreds of newsrooms across the country. And really took a bet that if we could grow a large audience on those partner publications, that there were a lot of different creative ways we could monetize that audience, which
And for
led
them,
us
their
to where we
incentive
are
was that,
today.
and for them, their incentive was, my budget is shrinking, but I'm always in need of more content. So you were kind of, you fit perfectly in there, and that you didn't charge them anything and give them high quality content, basically.
Yeah, publishers have been taking AP content for over a century. Uh, Revenues at the Associated Press have gone down 25% in the past decade. That's not due to a lack of want for content.
hmm
It's a budget thing, and
Yeah.
what we found is if we can provide them a free service, they have a huge appetite for the type of content we're creating. And we really started focusing on 2020 in how do we expand our distribution, uh, knowing that there would be ways to level monetization on top of that.
Yeah, and there was a report a few days ago that like Gannett, for instance, I think is like drastically reducing its spend for like local syndicated columnists and stuff like that. So they're just like everybody's pulling back their budgets for this type of stuff. So that really kind of provided an opening for you. So you suddenly now have hundreds of partners. You're getting tons of distribution. I was looking on your website. You're getting tens of millions of views of your content a month. But so let's talk about how you decided to start monetizing that content. So before, obviously, you were doing the revenue share with the aggregators, which was great. But a lot of these other publishers, they don't have a revenue share. How did you start monetizing this work?
Yeah, so going back to towards the end of 2020, on one hand, we had hundreds of publishers turning to us every morning saying, "What content do you have that we can complement our own coverage with?" And I think what we also saw happening over really the past 5 years is that more and more companies that are not what you would consider traditional publishers or media companies are starting to invest a really significant amount in producing quality content. And whereas when you thought about content marketing a decade ago, it was an insurance company producing a story on, 11 reasons you need life insurance now. Whereas today, you've got companies like NerdWallet investing really heavily in personal finance content. You've got Zillow doing really incredible research reports in the real estate market. You have, the infatuation was purchased by a credit card company. And so you have these institutions investing really heavily in wanting to produce and be associated with authoritative journalism. But what they don't have is distribution. And most of those companies, the 99% of companies that I didn't just mention are just having trouble building out a newsroom, and when they are publishing content, just placing it on their blog and hoping that someone besides their team reads it. And what we realized is we really had an opportunity to work with brands to let them underwrite coverage that Stacker was producing and get that placed out on our newswire organically. And so what we have really transitioned to over the past couple years is working with advertisers who do want to fund really quality journalism that our newsroom is producing, and use that as a way to subsidize the full newsroom so that we can make all content 100% free to any publisher that wants it.
And so your value to these brands is twofold. One, as a content agency that can take their data, often internal data, and create some good stories and visualizations around it. So obviously, a lot of brands hire content marketing agencies for that. But the second thing that a lot of content marketing agencies don't have is you have distribution. You have these hundreds and hundreds of publishing partners, and while there's no guaranteed distribution that any of them will pick it up, I'm guessing you can offer a decent likelihood that actual publishing partners will just take and distribute the branded content that you're creating using their data. And I'm guessing, obviously name checking them within the articles and charts and stuff themselves so that they get exposed to a much wider audience than if they were publishing it on their own blog, right?
Yeah, today when Stacker publishes a story, hundreds of publishers will pick up a piece on average. In a month, over 900 unique publishers take Stacker content and leverage Stacker content on their own sites. And so, to your point, yes, on one hand, we've been able to kind of provide our newsroom as a service to a lot of these companies that do want to invest in really quality content, but the last thing they want to do is think about how to build out a really high quality, journalism newsroom. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and on the other hand, be able to guarantee that distribution because we do have publishers turning to us every day looking for great content.
And what's interesting about your model is to disclose, like what disclosures are necessary. Because if like Vox Media creates a piece of sponsored content, they're going to have to label it as sponsored. It's going to have that on the at the top of the article. Users might be less likely to click on it, things like that. But because the publishers who are running the content, they're not the ones getting paid by the brand. They're like choosing it and they're not being paid to run the content. They're picking it of their own free will. Those sorts of disclosures aren't necessary on that content, right? So they're just picking it up as organic content, meaning that more people are likely to click on and engage it because it's been chosen by an editor as being high value and it's not being labeled as sponsored content. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is nothing new, right? So we talked about Zillow earlier. Zillow has been doing this for over a decade, where they produce really great content from real estate data about the housing market in your city, how prices have gone, etc. When, they're providing that content for free to any news outlet that wants it. So, when
Mhm.
my local newspaper runs this many homes sold, this is how prices changed according to Zillow. That is not a sponsored branded post. That is Zillow created some great content. They gave it to us, and we're deciding to run it or organically because
Mhm.
we want to share it with our readers. And really, we're kind of emulating that model, but making that model available to publishers that are not public companies.
Mhm. And so I think that's really interesting, a way to, guarantee distribution and that it's like good, high quality distribution. So how big is your newsroom now?
So today our newsroom is about 30 full-time employees, and then we also work with a roster of about 70 freelance writers at any given time.
And what's kind of like this of those 30, what's the skill set breakdown?
So it's about half and half. About half the team are data reporters, So folks who, all right, we want to run that story using unemployment data, they're going out, finding the most recent data, manipulating it, analyzing it, kind of coming up with the underlying data for the story. And then half the team are writers and editors who are kind of either writing the story in-house, assigning it to a freelance expert in our network, editing the story and placing it on the network.
Do you have like a large budget dedicated to like licensing data and stuff like that that you can get, exclusive data sources that might not be 100% publicly available without payment?
Surprisingly not. For
Mhm.
how many pieces of data journalism we put out every month, we have a surprisingly low budget for data. There's so much data available either through government, whether it be CDC, BLS, Census, FBI, you name it. There's a lot of NGOs that put out really incredible data. And then finally, there are a lot of companies that have really interesting data and are happy to make that available for journalism. So I think most data journalism organizations do not need a massive data budget.
Mhm.
Again, because having content produced with your data is great marketing for anyone that has it.
So how do you prioritize and choose stories? Like, do individual journalists have beats? Like somebody is, focused on new economic indicators or healthcare things. Like, how are you choosing with 30 people in the newsroom? How are you choosing which stories to tackle?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'll take a step back and say that Stacker is not breaking news. We really see our role as adding context to what's going on in the world with available data. So our stories are following on a day or two, a week after any news breaks, or looking at regularly updating indicators to your point and thinking about what are interesting stories to tell. So if you go to stacker.com, you'll see we cover a very broad range of topics from the economy, current events to lifestyle and entertainment. So we do have folks that are kind of broken into different desks by beat that are thinking about what are the really important stories that we can tell to add to the conversation and add context to what's going on in the world today.
And like, how much are you like kind of chasing big world events? Like, obviously, the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, that was a big thing. Is it like, okay, this is a huge piece of news? What kind of data journalism can we tell around abortion access or different stuff like that?
Yeah, there's definitely that piece of what data is out there. How can we add to the conversation? We also have found that now that we do have so many publishers turning to us for what types of kind of follow on coverage can I provide, that we're also starting to do some stories that are not first and foremost data driven, but are more service journalism, explainer journalism type stories where we can kind of explain the significance of that case being overturned on a state by state basis, let's say.
So why put precious resources for a bootstrapped company towards that when there are lots of media organizations can do that? Why not just stay focused on the data journalism?
I think what we found is that more so than just being a data journalism outlet, we are the 21st century newswire for the thousands of publishers that turn to us for content. And we're really
Mhm.
thinking about how do we provide a full product that has all of the kind of follow on journalism that a news outlet might want. And so, really thinking about how can we be of the most value to the publishers that turn to us for the types of content they're looking for to complement what they are able to do with in-house reporting.
And how do you, as the partnerships guy, how are you educating publishers? How are you onboarding new publishers? How much education do they need about how to use your service properly? What's the kind of back and forth communication that's going on?
Yeah, so we have a whole team. We have an incredible distribution team that is focused fully on distribution. That's a five-person team that's focused on partnerships, onboarding, and the product that publishers will use to take that content. So last at the beginning of last year, we brought on Ken Romano, who had spent a decade as the director of product at the Associated Press for their text products, to really build out the product suite so that we could meet journalists where they are and really work into their workflow.
And now that you're getting so much distribution, are there any opportunities to start building up the brand of Stacker in terms of link backs or being, a little bit first and pushing out a piece of content before all the other publishers do, so you get kind of that first mover advantage? What kind of, how are you building the brand of Stacker?
There definitely is that opportunity. I don't see us investing too heavily there. Again, I really want to do the things that I think we can be the best in the world at. And I do not want to build a consumer facing destination media company. I think our really superpower is to have massive distribution, to be, if people think about Associated Press when it comes to breaking news, when people think of Reuters, maybe when it comes to financial content, Newswire, that Stacker is right up there as the generally accepted place for a newswire providing either data journalism or news that puts the world into context. Except as opposed to those two other players, we're able to provide content for free and layer in business models that subsidize our newsroom so that we can provide that really valuable service to publishers.
Are the publishers required to, I guess, credit and link back to you?
They are. So, we
Mhm.
require they leave in the sourcing to any data sources or, citations. But then similar to when folks syndicate any sort of content, they're pointing back to the original version, really is just a best practice because that's where they're picking the piece up from.
What about like bylines for your journalists? Are they able to build their brands through the Stacker distribution?
They are. So bylines stay with stories, go out syndicated across, the hundreds of sites that might pick one up. That's definitely been a great part of our recruiting strategy is being able to tell a local journalist, hey, come, tell these same stories, but have them syndicated across hundreds of outlets.
And how do you prioritize national versus like are you doing any like local journalism, or is it mainly kind of national level news?
Yeah, we do, and we actually have built out some really interesting technology to take national stories and then reproduce them at a local level. So the great thing about working with structured data is that you can do a lot of really interesting things to tell stories. So if we want to go back to that example of maybe we ranked all 50 states by how their unemployment changed, we can run that same story, but for all 50 states to show the counties that have lost or gained the most jobs and the industries in those counties that have made changes. And so we actually have a whole operation focusing on localizing stories so that in a given month, we produce about 75 stories across either all 50 metros across all 50 states or across 384 metros that most national kind of data is made available across.
And when publishers use your content, are they just basically just using the whole article whole cloth, or are some choosing to just like take the charts or like block quote and then write their own piece, like rewrites, or like how are they mostly engaging with the content?
It's probably 50-50. So half the time folks are just taking the full article, saying this is great, I'm going to run this piece, put it on the homepage, add it to my newsletter, run it on social, however they want to use it. The other half of the time, people are adding in a paragraph to the introduction with some local context. So here's what's going on in my city. Now here's the data that Stacker provided. We actually, in December of last year, made all Stacker content available under the Creative Commons. So any journalist can actually go to stacker.com and grab text from an article and then add their own context, add their own images, etc. So we do see a fair amount of kind of remixing, mashing up of our stories, which as long as you're giving Stacker credit, we're happy with.
And with your journalists, like your staff, are you recruiting data journalists, or do you have have you created like a training program to like turn a local reporter into a data journalist?
It's a bit of both. So as I mentioned, we are and always have been a bootstrapped organization, and so starting early on, we trained in house. We early on we're thinking about our recruiting strategy in the first couple of years was looking for great, really smart journalists that we could show how to use Excel, that we could bring in, show them some really kind of more simple data manipulation tools. More recently, as we have grown, and kind of are setting our sights on a larger scale, we have started to bring in really sophisticated data journalism resources. So we actually just brought on as a new editor in chief, Micah Cohen, who spent a number of years as the managing editor at 538. That was really an investment in kind of upping the quality of data journalism at Stacker, as well as developing the team internally, of course.
So when you look at from 2017 to now, what are kind of like the big wins, the big like, benchmarks in your growth? Like obviously being able to hire someone from 538 that's like saying I am in league with 538, which is awesome, which is an awesome place to get to. But like are there any kind of like huge moments where something just like really exploded and took off, like some kind of piece of journalism you did that just got picked up everywhere? What are kind of the things that you think about when telling the story of your growth?
Yeah, so I think first major milestone was 6 months in when we broke even. The four founders said we're going to set aside a set amount of time where we're either going to be able to pay ourselves or come back to the table and say, should we really be doing this? And we
Mhm.
beat that timeline, got to profitability, and have been profitable ever since, and just growing through reinvesting profits. So that was definitely the first major milestone. Going forward, I think, growing the team to that 15-person full-time staff where we really felt like we could take a step back, take a breath, and, have the team in place to reset strategy was massive for us. Um, and then I think with the launch of Stacker Studio at the end of 2020, when we kind of sat down at the table with our publishing partners, went over this model of working with brands who are going to underwrite content and getting their explicit buy-in to, yeah, that sounds great, as long as we can, as long as the content is objective, still has the same integrity that it always has, and remains free, then that was a really big milestone in terms of kind of unlocking new opportunities for the business.
What about just like, were there any like huge stories or like, things that you're really proud of that really took off in terms of a content perspective?
Uh, yeah. So I mean, so many. I think one that really kind of started to set us apart last year was during COVID, looking at rural hospital bed capacity in individual metros. Data that was widely available in terms of you can download this from a spreadsheet, but we turned it into such an accessible way to access that data, read that story, and make it relatable that it really, I think, started to set us apart and show this is the level of types of content that we're going to be able to provide to our news partners. Is one that I think really kind of was a milestone for us.
And then for your studio partners, the brands, what kind of reporting can you offer? Because obviously you don't have access to the internal analytics of the all the various publishing platforms. How are you kind of gauging or helping them gauge success?
So first and foremost, it's showing them the sites that they have showed up on. So we are able to provide reports on, when we produce this story, it showed up across this hundred and some on sites. Here are the articles where they're sharing it with their readers. Here's places where it, showed up on the homepage. So that is the primary form of tracking. What we have started doing with some publishers that we're testing in beta is adding just a one by one pixel to stories where we're not tracking any user data, but we are able to see how many times a story was read, which we're starting to think about how we position that data and provide that data to our clients.
So your thinking is so kind of like how they do email tracking, an invisible pixel. So maybe I guess when a publishing platform is copying, just simply copying and pasting, they may be unknowingly copying and pasting this pixel in, and then you will be able to see how many times that page was loaded or something like that.
Yeah, we make it pretty clear that they are copying and pasting a pixel. So definitely don't
Hmm.
want to do it unknowingly. And we do have some people that choose to remove it, which is why it will never be
Hmm.
100% accurate. But
Yeah.
yes.
What about like tracking, like creating your own tracking links for public for brands? Like if you're like using Zillow's data and a link back to Zillow or something like that, are you using anything like that?
We're not today. I think there's so much opportunity for, as we're getting this size of distribution, the types of value we can provide to advertisers. There's adding custom tracking to links. There's eventually working in potentially affiliate, where we can leverage the audience not just to drive leads or sales for the client, but hopefully actually share revenue with the publishers themselves that are taking those stories. So think the way I think about the future of Stacker is distribution is our moat. We have not built super revolutionary technology. We have an incredible newsroom producing amazing content every day, but our ability to syndicate content across hundreds of sites, whether through our RSS feeds, whether through the newsletter that almost 1,000 journalists have signed up for, that is the moat that we're going to start to layer different types of value on, both for publishers and advertisers.
Do you think there's a lot of journalists who land on your site who don't realize they can just take the content?
Yes, definitely. And that's something that we've struggled with a bit is stacker.com, a place where someone can just read our site? Is it a marketing site? We just last month launched a new kind of overarching umbrella corporate site at stackermedia.com, which we're hoping, will be the place that people can go learn more about us. But yeah, that is admittedly a shortcoming right now.
And so your ambitions always extend to being a distributor of content to other platforms. Like you don't want to build the traffic to stacker.com outside of publishers and journalists to utilize your content.
Today, we do about 2 million unique visitors there. It's completely organic. There are 0 full-time employees thinking about audience development to stacker.com. Whereas, as I mentioned, we have, a 5-person team specifically focused on partnerships and syndication. So will we never in the next 100 years do that? Can't promise, but I can say that is nowhere on the roadmap right now. We are really focused on Stacker as a syndication and distribution service.
So you have 2 million unique people who are landing on stacker.com right now a month. Wow. And you don't try to where are most of those people
They're
coming
coming from
from? Google?
organic. It's coming from Google. Google is fickle.
Uh-huh.
And again, it turns out if you don't, even 2 million people on a site is not, it's not enough to support a 60-person staff. Um, and I did not, I don't want to be in a business that is focused on growing traffic and selling display advertising.
Yeah, but even if you just slap programmatic advertising on there, you could probably generate a decent amount of
So
money
we
if it
do
even if
have
it doesn't cover.
programmatic display
Oh,
there.
okay.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
we're not, there's money to be had. We're taking it, but it makes up less than 5% of company revenue.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about the future a little bit. Like, do you have plans to diversify your revenue in the future? What your bootstrapped company, but as you continue to have more revenue to play around with, what are the things you want to invest in?
So I think there's, one level of investment is continuing to expand distribution because that is, the larger that audience is from a syndication standpoint, the more ways there are, the more places there are to layer in monetization. As I mentioned, I think there's a really exciting play in integrating affiliate into content and actually sharing revenue back to the publisher. So if you are the New York Times, you can buy the Wirecutter. If you are a locally owned independent newspaper, you cannot buy the Wirecutter and or produce affiliate content. We already have people that have our feeds and trust the type of content we produce. So I think there's a really exciting opportunity to turn to them and say, hey, we're going to start incorporating affiliate into this feed. You can take that content if you want, and we'll earn a rev share off of any revenue generated.
Mhm.
Obviously, very exciting for advertisers. That's something that folks ranging from Bankrate and NerdWallet to every D2C company is thirsting for. Um,
Yeah. If you tried to do the affiliate, would you just do the Wirecutter thing of doing product reviews or rankings, or would you try to put your own kind of data journalism spin on it in some way?
I think probably put our own spin. Again, we're not going to be the best at product reviews, and our newsroom is not set up to get 100 fridges shipped to it and review them.
Yeah.
I think, what we can do is say, hey, we're going to work with this company to look at, what areas and what industries are gaining the most jobs right now and bring in, an Indeed.com affiliate link, and if people click that and they have a CPC in place, we can share revenue directly back to the publisher.
Interesting. So creating more incentives for the publishers to run your content other than it just being good content that will help drive traffic. Like you want to do some kind of revenue share with them.
Yep.
Mhm.
Um,
So you
yeah,
mainly focus. Oh, sorry.
go for it.
Keep on going. I was gonna say you mainly focus on like text based and visual content. What about other mediums like podcasting, video? You don't really do much in that right now, right?
We don't. And so, thinking of us as a newswire, there's less of an opportunity, less value to our publishing partners to do things like podcasts. We're moving a lot into visualizations. It obviously lends itself to data a lot. Um, Things like video, other mediums. Not against, very expensive to produce. And as a bootstrapped company, I think one of the really important things is to say, what are the bets that we're going to place that we are confident are going to have ROI? A video production, facility is not cheap.
Yeah, but certainly there are a lot of news services that specialize in video because that's like a thing that publishers
Publishers
are
want.
hungry to syndicate.
Yep.
So you think that's like a future investment for you?
I do think there's opportunity there. I know that there's a lot of interest from publishers, as you mentioned, in more video content. A lot of our stories do lend themselves to being turned into videos or versioned off into videos. So I could see that in our future.
And so you don't want to focus at all driving traffic back to the website. What about just building up your social presence just for branding, for awareness, things like that, so publishers are aware of you? What's kind of like how are you marketing yourselves, or is it all one-to-one relationships of cold calls and spread and showing them your deck or whatever?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we the four founders had partnerships background, and that really has been our strength is expanding through partnerships. For a media company, we are embarrassingly quiet on when it comes to social media. We do have a Twitter account where we are sharing stories, but there's no one thinking about social full time at Stacker out of our 55 employees. As I think about growth, is there an opportunity with social from a marketing getting in front of journalists? Definitely. I think what we found is, again, our strategy. How do we make it so that instead of 1,000 publishers are taking Stacker and using Stacker content a month, it gets to 5,000 over the next year? That is, we've partnered with organizations like Lion, who has hundreds of locally owned independent newsrooms. Partnering with nonprofit newsrooms and nonprofits that network with hundreds of nonprofit newsrooms. We've partnered with content management systems to make our content available to any clients that actually work with that CMS. So we have really taken a partnerships first approach to growth.
Do you have any sense of like how many publishers are using your content for non-internet content? So like a newspaper running
Printing
it
it
in the
out.
print edition or the magazine, or like a local news or a radio station just reading the article or different stuff like that.
So on print, I mean, I can only reference a handful of times where people have said, "Hey, look, here's a picture. We used your content, in our local
Uh-huh.
newspaper." I know that a lot of radio stations do use Stacker as kind of idea and conversation fodder for their DJs.
Yeah.
Not something that we are tracking closely, but when you're producing 150 localized stories a month, or stories with a local angle, a lot of DJs are definitely finding a lot of entertainment and things to talk about.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, Noah. Well, those were all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, as I said, embarrassingly silent on social media. But you can check us out at stackermedia.com or see our content at stacker.com.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.